and welcome to Massa News. Later today, we will be covering the life and legacy of John Marshall, one of our nation's most influential and beloved judges on the Supreme Court. As for now, let's move on to weather with Alexis Zarko.
Hello, I'm Alexis Zarko, and I am here with the weather report in Chicago, Illinois. It has been heavily raining all morning and will continue into the late evening. The temperature is 45 degrees with a real feel of 36 degrees. There is a cold front coming in from Wisconsin, so be prepared for some cold weather for the next few days. I would not suggest going out today. It's pretty chilly, Billy. Now better go back to the acres in the newsroom.
Thanks, Alexis, for the weather. Now on to the main event. Today we're going to be interviewing John Marshall. John Marshall was born on September 24th, 1755 in Virginia. He grew up in Virginia and later fought in the Continental Congress alongside our very first president, General George Washington. Now let's get on with the interview.
Thanks, guys. I'm currently here with John Marshall, who served as the 4th Chief Justice on the Supreme Court for 34 years. Mr. Marshall, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you mentioned, I did serve as the 4th Chief Justice. John Adams elected that I take over after John Jay resigned Chief Justice in 1801 because he believed the court lacked weight and respect, and I served in 1801 until 1835. I also fought in the Revolutionary War, but later left the military in 1780 to study law, leading me to my years of Chief Justice.
That all seems quite interesting, but what was it like serving on the court? And what was the first important case you attended to?
The court always seemed to keep me on my feet. There were so many different cases I had to attend to. Some of these cases were the McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819 and Gibbons versus Ogden in 1824. The first important case I was present for was the Marbury versus Madison in 1803, in which the Supreme Court applied judicial review for the first time.
Did you originally want to study law?
Not at all, actually. I wanted to be like my father's friend George Washington growing up. General George Washington was the one who inspired me in my teen years and later caused me to become an officer with the Continental Army's 3rd Regiment of Virginia and served under Colonel Morgan. I grew up learning of war and fighting in battles, but as I grew older, I realized that I was more interested in politics.
Now, how about you tell us about what life was like growing up?
Well, my father was Colonel Thomas Marshall, and my mother was Mary Randolph Keith Marshall. I was the firstborn of 15 children. My father homeschooled me, except for the 1 year I attended Camp Bell Academy. Then I married my soulmate, Mary Willis Ambler Marshall, in 1783. When I first asked her, she actually said no. But after I left her house that night due to my embarrassment, she sent her cousin after me with a lock of her hair. I intertwined the lock of her hair with my own and put it in a golden locket. My wife wore it around her neck for the rest of her years. On her death day, she asked me to take the locket off of her neck and place it around my own neck. I miss her greatly, but together we had 6 children, a beautiful family in my opinion.
Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Marshall. You have had a very interesting backstory. Now, back to our anchor women in the newsroom.
Before we go back to our regularly scheduled program, a monumental event has happened regarding the U.S. territory. As most of you know, there has been a great debate on colonist expansion lately, and as we all know, the reason behind this debate would be the Native Americans. I am happy to announce President Andrew Jackson has officially signed the Indian Removal Act. This act will grant land west of the Mississippi to Indian tribes that have been agreed to give up their original territory.
As the court cases mentioned, John Marshall has given us quite a bit of information about the different court cases he's dealt with. Now let's expand on this information. The Marbury versus Madison case is well known and is credited with giving the United States judicial review, which means that the judicial branch was given the power to check any legislative law that might go against the Constitution. Another case Marshall attended to was the McCulloch versus Maryland case. This case allowed for the constitutional creation of the United States Bank. And the last important case we'll be discussing is the Gibbons versus Ogden case, which brought more power to the Congress and gave them more power over interstate commerce. Now on to a short commercial break. Don't you just hate it when you're in court falling asleep during every case because your gavel is too boring? Well, now it's your time to wake up with the new Squabble. Instead of boring old thud and a rough handle, our handcrafted, carefully made Squabble has a cushioned handle along with a new and improved sound. Never pass out during court again. Get yours today. Call 1-800-BANG-THAT-SQUABBLE. And for a limited time offer, you can now get a second Squabble for free.
I am John Marshall, and I approve this message.
Welcome back, everyone. For those of you just joining us today, we're covering John Marshall's life and legacy. In John Marshall's life on the Supreme Court, he made over 1,000 decisions and penned 500 opinions. From Marshall, the central government gained a more powerful judicial branch, making him 10 times more successful than his successor, John Jay did. Through the court case Marbury v. Madison, we gained the power of judicial review. From McCulloch v. Maryland, we gained an official United States bank. Gibbons v. Ogden brought Congress more power over interstate commerce, which has greatly impacted our world. In the trial between Fletcher v. Beck, the Supreme Court established property rights for owners and made it possible for SCOTUS to invalidate laws that conflict with our Constitution. Oh, who's calling? It looks like it's one of our West Coast forecasters. Mackenzie, is that you?
Hi guys.
Well, since you're here, do you mind telling us how the weather looks from over there, or just generally the tropical islands of Hawaii?
Currently it is 80 degrees with a high of 85. It is mostly sunny with minimal clouds. The water's refreshing and the waves are good for surfing. And there's no rain on the radar, so it looks like it's going to be a good day.
Well, thank you, Mackenzie, for this information in Hawaii. Now back to the people in the newsroom. Well, today has been a day filled with opportunities not many of us get to have. Thank you for being with us today. And thank you for joining on learning about John Marshall. See you next time on Massa. Bye!
In the handeth, don't touch it. I'll stab you with
You're a man! This is confirmed!
No, I'm not.
This is confirmed!
Are you sure?
Right now you're a man.
It's
Right now you're a
2017,
man.
Nika. It's 2017.
I hate this with a passion.
You're dancing in the rain. Sing in the rain!
What should I sing? I don't know.
Oh.
Ow! My toe! I can't even stop! Behind me.
Mihoy, mihoy?
Behind me!